Hello and welcome everybody. I found a very interesting article. It's by The Guardian. Well, it might be biased, but as a person who doesn't support either of the American parties, I do not support Democrats, I do not support Republicans. Because I'm not an American, I'm gonna try to be as neutral about it as I can. So the article is about Republicans and Democrats claiming that Democrats live with less political diversity, which means that Democrats, they're saying that Democrats tend to live amongst people who share the same views as they do. Therefore, they're not getting any opposite view into their daily lives. Okay, let's just move on. In a surprising new national survey, members of each major American political party were asked what they imagined to be the beliefs held by members of the other party. The survey asked Democrats how many Republicans believe that racism is still a problem in America today. Democrats guessed 50%, is actually 79%. The survey asked Republicans how many Democrats believe most police are bad people. Republicans estimated half. It's really 15%. So, well, you can actually see that the problem is on the both sides, so like it's not isolated to only one of the political party, because well, let's be honest, many people are just not open for any different type of political views or overall views, worldviews. Many people just stay isolated in their own safety bubble, and it doesn't actually matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. But okay. The survey, published by think tank More in Common as a part of its Hidden Tribes of America project, was based on a sample of more than 2,000 people. One of the study's findings: the wilder a person's guess as to what the other party is thinking, the more likely they are to also personally disparage members of the opposite party as mean, selfish, or bad. Not only do the two parties diverge on a great many issues, they also disagree on what they disagree on. Well, okay, that's actually true, because when you interview people from the right, many of them will say that the left is just evil. I cannot link the article, I don't have it with me, but once I saw it, I saw that 50% of Democrats and 50% of Republicans think that the opposite party is a threat. And if 50% of America actually cares about politics, looking at how many people go vote, then a quarter of the country actually fucking hates itself. So I think this is the main problem in today's America, that the divide between the two parties is getting stronger and stronger, and it's not going to be positive by any means. This much we might guess, but what's startling is the further finding that higher education does not improve a person's perception. Well, yeah, actually it doesn't, because you still can find a very ignorant person who have a doctorate, who have a PhD. It doesn't matter. If you have this type of character and you're just ignorant, you won't change no matter if you finish primary school, high school, you got a master's degree or a PhD. Sometimes even hurts it. In their survey answers, highly educated Republicans were no more accurate in their ideas about democratic opinion than poorly educated Republicans. Well, again, I think the problem is that it's not about education because, well, let's say, you'd probably have to learn about philosophy or psychology. Well, maybe not philosophy, but I think psychology would be a good idea to learn, and only then you would actually be able to notice that I shouldn't do this, I shouldn't do that, that's toxic, that's inappropriate, and that's just stupid. Of course, I'm not saying that it's a guarantee. If you go to a psychology college, you start seeing that, oh, I was doing this wrong, this person is doing that wrong. Your worldview might not change. Well, okay, you don't have to take my word for it. I'm no psychologist myself. For Democrats, the education effect was even worse. The more educated a Democrat is, according to the study, the less he or she understands the Republican worldview. Well, I think a lot of has to do with the fact that in colleges and in universities, there are strong worldview bubbles, if I can call it that. On universities, you can see that people divide to Democrats and Republicans. You'll find basically ghettos in most of universities. On one side there will be people who support Democrats, on the other side there will be people who support Republicans, and this is not a good thing for any sort of worldview diversity. There's just no diversity of opinion because, too many people just stay within their own bubble and never look at how the other side looks. So I think, in my opinion, this is the main problem. This effect is so strong that Democrats without a high school diploma are 3 times more accurate than those with a postgraduate degree. And the more politically engaged a person is, the greater is the distortion. Well, again, I think it's because of the political bubbles. Well, I'm blaming everything on it, but I think this is most of the I'm not saying it's every single bit of the problem, but I feel that it's most of the problem. People just don't care about listening to the other side and thinking like maybe they have something in common, maybe they are right with something. No, both Republicans and Democrats tend to not do that, which is a bad thing, of course. The main idea of a society is to progress. Therefore, I think we should share our ideas and not keep them away from the other side. If you're a Democrat, you should speak sometimes to maybe Republicans, maybe Libertarians. If you're a Republican, you should speak to Democrats, you should speak to Libertarians, just make sure that you still hear somebody else's opinion, and you make sure that your opinion is actually valid, because you don't want to be a hypocrite. And it doesn't matter on what side you are. Always do make sure that your opinion actually makes sense and that you can actually prove it right. Yeah, okay, but moving on. What could be going on? Bubblism, the report suggests. Oh yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about. Even more than the Republican counterparts, highly educated Democrats tend to live in exclusively democratic enclaves. The more they report, almost all my friends hold the same political views, the worse their guesses on what Republicans think. Yeah, that's why I try to interact with people of a different ideology, of a different worldview, because I don't want to stay enclosed in my worldview, who at any times could be wrong. Well, I know many friends of mine that are left wing, that are right wing, well, more like conservative and liberal, but doesn't matter. But yeah, it's just a good idea to not fall into a bubble. So do they believe in sticking with their own? No. When asked in a Pew survey whenever it's important to live in a place where most people share my political views, half of conservatives and only a third of liberals agreed. Although in principle more tolerant of political diversity, highly educated and mostly urban Democrats live ironically with less of it. Something besides city living might be going on, particularly among highly engaged Democrats. I think many are in grief. The recent losses have been hard to absorb: the presidency, the Supreme Court, the Senate, a majority of governorship, and the states in which the governor and both houses of the state legislature are controlled by the same party. 22 are Republican and 14 are Democratic. Withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, Neil Grouch, voter suppression, children in cages, the future of the party highly unclear. Democrats are now the ones who feel like strangers in their own land. Fucking hell, Discord. Okay, sorry for the Discord incident. Moving on. In the face of loss or personal crisis, whether a pink slip, a medical issue, or political defeat, most of us turn inward toward what feels conforming, and safe. During the Great Depression and more recently in the aftermath of 2008 crash, those who had lost homes and jobs tended to volunteer less, visit less, generally retreat from the world, sometimes thereby making a bad situation worse. Today's wounded warriors of the left, including many women and voters of color who have struggled mightily and fear their progress is in danger of going up in smoke, might feel a similar need for their families. Well, yeah, I can agree with that. People think that talking to somebody from the outside might be a danger, and they're not into risking anything at this moment in particular. Well, but this is only a closed loop. Like, at one point you have to get out, because you'll just stay in there forever. Because something gets bad, you get isolated, and it's not getting any better. And it won't get any better, because if you keep, it's like protectionism. If your country, well, let's take for example North Korea, if you just simply close your own country, the only thing that can happen is regress, and the best case scenario is no changes. Because if you basically close your country, you're closing it from any foreign investments, any foreign trade, any foreign technology. So in the end, you're actually just stuck with the very same thing, and if you fail to maintain it, it actually gets worse. But just on the side. Being home surely restores one's spirit. But in the long run, staying home leads to trouble. It keeps the left from knowing what it needs to know, good news and bad. It further marginalizes it. After all, in the heat of battle, the most brilliant generals are not those who insult the enemy from inside their own tent. It is those who mostly astutely gauge the troop count, the terrain, and quids of the opposing general. Well, yeah. In peacetime, too, in this political moment, the best approach is to learn about what is sometimes alternative truth in which Fox News watchers live. The class and cultural grievances it appeals to amplify, and to understand as one keeps listening, a curiosity hidden in moderation, in substance and tone. For starters, Democrats can recognize pieces of common ground where they already exist. For my 2016 book, Strangers in Their Own Land, Anger and Mooring on the American Right, I studied enthusiastic backers of Donald Trump in Louisiana, the last place on earth a Democrat might look for a common ground. But one man I talked with, someone raised on a sugar plantation, retired from a lifelong career in oil, a proud member of the Louisiana Tea Party, and a Trump supporter, grinned broadly at the mention of Bernie Sanders. Free college, free medical healthcare. How y'all going to pay for that? He's a pie in the sky guy, he said. But he's a good man, Uncle Bernie. Although an oil worker, he was a fan of clean energy and liked the idea of Manhattan Project to implement it. Well, yeah, of course, because it's actually kind of foolish to say that just because you are right wing, you are conservative, you have to support fossil fuels, the usage of fossil fuels, that you're by no means an environmentalist. No, I know many people who actually do care about the environment as well as they do care about the free market. But of course, it also applies to liberals. The fact that somebody is a liberal doesn't have to mean that they're a socialist, doesn't mean that they have to support single-payer healthcare. Well, it doesn't actually have to mean anything about the economy. The fact that you're a liberal only means that you care about things like gay marriage, and you don't even have to. But most liberals just care about gay marriage, female rights, and minority rights. And this is the base idea of liberalism, to liberalize society, and not to. It's not a economic view. It's a social view, and many people just don't understand it. Because the fact that you're a conservative doesn't have to mean that you're a capitalist. At any point, you can be a socialist conservative and a free market liberal. Well, okay, but moving on. Among Republicans, he isn't alone. Despite the president's denial of the climate crisis, national polls recently conducted by researchers at Yale, Stanford, and Monmouth universities show that a majority of voters in both parties now agree on many actions to mitigate it. Well, yeah, I think it's extremely important to find a common ground, because if there is one single thing we both want, we should just work on it. And if in this case it's saving the planet, well, it makes perfect sense. Nobody wants to fucking die. Nobody wants to destroy the fucking planet, and well, unless you're insane. But yeah, the most important thing is to find the common ground. Should the US set strict carbon dioxide emission limits on existing coal-fired power plants to reduce global warming and improve public health? Yale asked even if the cost of electricity to consumers and companies would likely increase. 87% of Democrats and 56% of Republicans answered yes. Should the US participate in the Paris Climate Accord and reduce greenhouse gas emissions regardless of what other countries do? Majority of voters in both parties said yes. A coalition of college Republicans club recently endorsed a tax on carbon pollution. Well, that actually makes perfect sense, because even from a point of view of a free marketer, a carbon tax is still a good thing, because it actually makes even more sense, because free market is, the idea of being in a free market, being an entrepreneur on a free market, is to produce more with less costs. And the free market is always searching for the cheapest solutions. And if you simply tax fossil fuels, it will become economically inefficient. Like it won't have any sort of reason to exist. Therefore, people will just start investing in green technologies. They start investing in wind. They start investing in water. They start investing in solar panels. This just makes perfect sense, because simply, if the free market is always searching for the cheapest and most effective technologies, just make sure that fossil fuels are not cheap and are not effective, which is basically taxing it. And that's the only thing you have to do. People will voluntarily change to green technology, I assure you that. There are other promising signs of middle ground. In response to the violence and death in Charlottesville, Virginia, big donors to the feuding parties, George Soros and David Koch, jointly founded the After Charlottesville project to curb online calls to violence. The New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the Texas Senator Ted Cruz have co-sponsored a congressional bill preventing lawmakers from entering lucrative second careers as corporative lobbyists. Conservatives and liberals united to push for ex-felons in Florida to win the right to vote in 2018, and this year pushed modest but significant reform of our draconian criminal justice law through Congress. Such cross-party diplomats have not misjudged their opposite numbers. Such a good lesson for us all. When Martin Luther King marched from Selma to Montgomery, his fellow marchers included priests, a nun, two rabbis, a Greek Orthodox archbishop, and clergy of many Protestant denominations, black and white. In the long run, majority political change virtually always requires rising up to across a bridge, an urgently needed model for the Democratic Party itself today. Well, yes, that's actually a pretty good article, I have to admit that. For everybody who's still listening, I want you to make sure that you do listen to other worldviews, no matter if you're a Republican, a conservative, a Republican, a liberal, a libertarian. It doesn't matter. You always should listen to a different type of perspective, because in the end you can actually learn a lot from each other. And a united world is a better world. Just remember that. Stay safe.